Hello, guys. Welcome to this new edition of Mind Podcast. This is Aadit Kapadia, and I'm welcoming you on yet another day. For all those celebrating, wish you a very Merry Christmas. When you are listening to this podcast, it'll probably be after Christmas, but we are recording around the Christmas time. When it's Christmas somewhere in the world, at least. I won't say where. But together with me on Mind Podcast this week is our returning champion. I like to call all of our podcast alumni as returning champion, as people know. He's the counselor to the Permanent Mission of India to the WTO, public policy analyst, columnist, and our good friend Ashish Chandorkar. Hello, Ashish.
Hi Aadit, good to be back.
Oh, pleasure. It's been what, almost a year, I think, since we last recorded a podcast together. So,
Yeah, I guess so.
yeah, I don't know if it was pre-COVID or post-COVID, but yeah, we have very resourceful listeners who look up when we last recorded and tell me कि एक fake news एक year नहीं 11 महीने पहले record किया था. So I will tell all our listeners to do that. I'm already apologizing for the raspiness in my voice, heavy allergies around me, but we'll try to make the most of it. आशीष what a fascinating time, right? Like 1.5 साल 2 साल हो गए almost COVID के बाद, right? You've been in this position with the WT for almost 4 months now,
Yeah,
and
4 months.
when you went there was nothing like Omicron there. You uh, you you were going from a place that was going through a worst COVID wave to a place where had less COVID sort of infections, and now the scales have totally reversed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also good to see the difference in which people approach this, right? So here, like Switzerland is currently logging in close to about, let's say, 10,000 cases a day, which scale to India would be, God knows what, 12, 13 lakh cases a day for us, I mean, for our population.
Hmm, hmm.
So, which is significantly higher than the peak reported cases, which I think was on 8th of May, which where we had 416K. So 3 times that figure approximately, or 2.5 times that figure. But there's no panic as such right now. I see actually the hospital situation here also is not very good. Last week it's improved a bit, but at the peak there were 85% of all ICUs and all hospital beds were occupied, and I think the local army is also helping the medical professionals to deal with the situation. But it's quite I mean, outside you don't feel that. People, in fact, I still see people without masks.
Okay.
Only when they are in the public transport where it is mandatory to have masks, you see them. But I think a lot of people still do not, are not masking up.
Yeah,
So
it's
yeah,
it's it's the same situation here as well in America. In Texas, it's the same thing. I mean, Texas is still less than the other states. Right now, New York is the worst. But people are going to football games. People are going to bowl games. Like, it's no big deal, and it's unfortunate, but it's almost people have taken this to be the way of life.
no, I think also the recognition probably that maybe the virus doesn't spread outdoors. That's been the general belief now, right? So if you were vaccinated and if you were outdoors,
Mhm.
it is probably acceptable to kind of not have mask up. That's the belief here.
But tell me
Uh,
this. But tell me this, Ashish. Do you think that this is the new normal? Like, do you think unfortunately, this is the way forward?
I mean, I hope not. It's kind of, as you said, it's almost 2 years, right? That we've been through this, and uh, wearing a mask has become second nature to a lot of us. I think the kids are losing out. The children who are growing up in this generation, they'll have a very difficult time
Say.
both adjusting to the social, structures, the way they behave with others, what they learn. I mean, of course, because the formal education has been also, I mean, it's taken a hit in most countries.
Hmm.
So it's a big issue actually. I hope not.
So I've actually been thinking about this, right? It's very important, the kids aspect of it. Ki you don't want a whole generation growing on thinking कि भाई अब तो this is it's normal for me not to talk to some kid I don't know because that's how we used to make friends, right? When you are a kid, you like there were no play dates, so to speak. आप playground पे जाओ, कोई किसी भी बच्चे के साथ खेलो. The whole concept कि society के बच्चे किसी एक घर में खेल रहे हैं, right? That just seems like a bit of like a thing of the past, and we don't even know what is the way forward.
Yeah, at least I'm not even sure if kids themselves will go back to it very, very quickly. I mean, I'm sure that many of them are also impacted
Yeah,
psychologically in terms of accepting other kids around them. At least in Switzerland, the schools are open. Here, there's only one closure of schools at the peak of wave two, which here, I mean, here, this is wave two. But otherwise, the schools have been open here. But I know that a lot of parents are not sending kids.
yeah.
Schools have made a hybrid type of an arrangement. So it's a issue which everyone has to grapple with individually as to what they think is best for their families.
Absolutely. And then this is the new normal as well in terms of podcasting and broadcasting, because trust me, guys, we did not plan to talk about COVID when we were talking offline before we started recording. But it's just been like a thing, that's our own catharsis, also just knowing how everyone is across the world, and, bringing you what our perspective is from where we are located. Please write to us in the comments or tweet to us or write on Facebook that what do you think and what is the situation there, and write to us if you want to cover a certain aspect. I have done a lot of podcasts with doctors from across the world about COVID situations in countries, but would be interesting to know if you want to do one specific to that country and stuff. एक बार मैंने क्रॉस कॉन्टिनेंट पॉडकास्ट किया था and we focused on the psychological aspect because तब तो पता नहीं था कि वर्क फ्रॉम होम कितना टाइम तक चलेगा. Now we are starting work, I think, from next month, so let's see. But getting into the meat of the thing, so to speak, Ashish, what we wanted to talk to you about was that now, since you've been here for 4 months, we are just assuming you know everything there is to know about India's permanent mission at WTO. I'm kidding, of course, but you've written about public policy, you've written about economics, and in various aspects, right? And you've in India, as is with Joe Biden, will probably tell you more than even our Indian thing, that he's been trying to get his Build Back Better Act passed, और एक senator, एक congressman की वजह से it's not being able to pass. So ultimately, it's always a between economics and politics, right? Competing, and we've seen plenty times that good economics is good politics and stuff. But of course, it's a battle you have to strike. But what I want to talk to you about is in terms of people like you and I who've written about reforms, who want reforms, India to take a new direction under reforms, right? What are the new sectors where you think that India is focusing, right? Like apart from the usual sectors like agriculture, infrastructure, do you think in terms of innovation, in terms of skill, in terms of biomedical, we're going? And when you are in a trade position where you are talking to other countries, do you see a change in attitude towards India when it comes to these reforms and stuff is concerned?
Right. So, two, three aspects here, Adit. So, firstly, in terms of reforms, if you see, when the Atmanirbhar Bharat package was announced in May of last year,
Hmm.
there were a series of announcements which were packaged in that larger 10-15 day window where various press conferences were held by the FM and also by the PM when he addressed the nation. So some of them were reforms which were structural in nature, like labor laws. Labor laws was anyway happening, but it was kind of packaged alongside that initiative.
Hmm. Hmm.
Agricultural reforms, which now have been repealed. There were also sectors which were opened up, like space, for example, which was a new area. There was another point of the production-linked incentives, which were essentially incentives given to make in India. Any company, whether it is an Indian company or a foreign company, can come and establish like a plant in India. They have to commit to a certain incremental sales volume through that the production facility, and they have to demonstrate that how will they achieve that target, and then a government will refund a percentage of sales back to them as an incentive to set up in India. This was done for 13 sectors. So this was a larger, let's say, context of reforms. There were other things also like defense. The defense reforms around private participation, ordnance factory boards to be merged together. There were telecom reforms which were alluded to, which kind of shaped up later this year. So there was a whole package of reforms which came under the Atmanirbhar Bharat announcement. That was one part. The second part was also around how the RBI supported the economy with its monetary measures. Only now things are, RBI is kind of normalizing the policy, or at least talking about it. But RBI has been fairly active in terms of ensuring that the liquidity was not a problem, that the credit reached the parts of economy which needed it the most, like the small businesses and so on.
Yeah.
So the second aspect which was kind of taken up. The third aspect was also very critical is the animal spirits part, right? So PM has been talking about uh, the the road ahead, the potential for the Indian economy,
Mm.
the 5 trillion target. I mean, maybe there'll be a year to be adjusted there. I don't know, given that we lost 2 years in the process. But the target of a 5 trillion economy, the promise of what we can achieve, given that other countries are aging, we have still got a working population. I mean, a population where we are adding working population for at least another 15 years or so, if not 20. This decade has to be a decade of making a difference in terms of getting more industrialization to India, shifting the core economic patterns in terms of how many people are employed in what kind of sectors. So I think these are. I think this part is also. I mean, of course, economists talk about the animal spirits, but I believe that having that faith and having the confidence in the future of the country is very critical, because that is
Mm.
what also drives people to take risks, right? And
Absolutely.
this need not be government driven. Some of it we are seeing in the technology sector, for example, right? This was I think we had the highest ever year. I mean, highest ever addition to unicorns in India. The 36 billion came in as investments in Indian startups. So at least there are parts of the economy where that euphoria or that confidence is visible. But I think
Mm.
it's very critical to take it to a larger segment of the economy, and that's what I think the government has been focused on in the terms of messaging.
Absolutely. There is one thing, one very interesting thing what you said about lending, right? Because in India we don't focus on that. The focus, I believe, earlier in back in the day was on interest rates. कि मुझे fixed deposit से कितना मिल रहा है and things like that, which resulted in an economy where we had issues where you were lending at almost 10, 12, 14%, which is not sustainable. That has significantly gone down in the last few years, right? Now, do you expect that as we grow or as we start push towards a more job creation, entrepreneurial economy, that will sort of go down, and there will be, this is right now everything is controlled by the Reserve Bank and so forth, but there will be a sort of a situation where it'll be like, of course, yahan pe bhi, even in US the federal rate of interest is there, but in the thinking, we move beyond that old thinking ki we have to talk about interest rates and we have to talk more about borrowing rates. Do you think that transition will happen?
So I think other in some ways that transition has happened already in India. I mean, if you see, at least when I was growing up,
Yeah.
perhaps a few years, before you grew up, but at least in my generation,
Thank you for confirming my youth, Ashish. I don't think we are that far apart, but for the sake of our podcast, flattery will get you everywhere.
no, absolutely.
Uh,
So I think in my generation, people who did not invest in stocks, and there were like really very few people who understood that space. But I think interest rates for everything, right? FD was everything. The only way you could save money was via FD. So the expectation was that the FD rates has to remain high. But I mean, of course, this is very intuitive that if FD rate is high, then your interest rate, like what you, I mean, if you get a higher interest rate, you also pay a higher interest rate when you take a loan, right? So it's kind of it goes together, because the difference between the two is the spread which the bank makes. So if they have to pay you more, they have to also charge you more to, just to simplify things. I mean, of course, there are other issues around administered rates and so on in India on different government schemes. So I think but that focus has shifted in two ways. One is, of course, that the cost of capital, at least in some sectors, like for example, the technology sector or the new age startups, at least there it is reducing simply because those sectors are open to FDI, right? So if there's a loose monetary policy in the US, it is also going to benefit Indian startups, because there's a lot of money, liquidity sloshing around, and it has to find a home somewhere. And in many cases, the home tends to be a developing economy like India. So the fact that the startups or the companies in India are able to raise easy money and at money at scale, I mean, partly I think that has also changed the perception of how you look at the concept of return on investment, right? So that is one part of it. The other part is, even in India, because there has been much more financialization of the economy. People are investing, like from the times when FD and real estate were the only two. I mean, gold maybe. So there were only three avenues of investment for most Indians. Now, with the greater financialization, I mean, of course, people take interest in all kinds of asset classes, right? Uh, Equity markets. I mean, crypto is a new kind of
Yeah.
new age fad. Or I mean, I don't know if it's a fad. That's kind of jury's out on that.
Personally, where I am right now, it's a huge fad. It's a huge fad. I've not
Yeah, no,
still taken on it, but yeah,
yeah, no, I mean, in the sense, I meant fad. I don't know if it's transitory, right? Like the inflation, quote unquote. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen there, right? So, but yeah, I mean, the point is people are investing more and more on the financial assets. So
actually,
when people,
no, no. Carry on. I'll tell you after I complete your point. Carry on.
so when people invest in financial assets, they also understand the concept that the interest rates are intrinsically linked to. I mean, the whole lending and borrowing cycle are essentially complementary exercises. So they understand this concept better. So I think people have begun to understand that already. Of course, there'll be a segment every time interest rates go down. I mean, of course, it hurts the typically the senior citizens who may not have invested and cannot invest at that stage of their life. So it hurts them, of course. That is one segment which gets impacted. And also, the administered rates still have to be maintained in many cases. The rates on PF, I mean EPF, the rates on like Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana. I mean, those kind of those kind of schemes or programs will continue. So I think that is getting it's a problem in some cases, but I mean, of course, I think the awareness or the understanding has gone up.
Absolutely. No, and the reason I was laughing was I was like, if we need probably 100,000 views, we should just title the podcast saying "Crypto Is It a Fad?" and let watch the YouTube link go crazy. But jokes apart, no, you're absolutely right. Maybe it is a transient feature, and how much of this is embedded is when I moved to US about 14 years ago. One of the first things we did was bank में जाके ask the FD rate, right? Because वो Indian mentality रहती है, and they said 1%. And I think I should just have freeze framed the expression on my dad's face. Like I just don't think he was, because when you come to visit, and I have visited US before, you never wonder about this and in 98 or 99 or something. And and you never think कि India में at that time in 2007 8 India में the rates were like sky high, like 8-9%, right? And then you come down here, it's like 1% 2%. They're like ये क्या बकवास है यार, this is like nothing. So it's that's the culture shock we get. But talking about policy, this is something that's very close to me and you've written a lot about it, is infrastructure, right? And you monitor infrastructure because in India right now it's taking a very global turn, because India may, I think, where we had a huge chance and sort of COVID nipped that chance in the bud, sadly, where was the aviation sector. Because India actually was more centrally located than Dubai is. Of course, Emirates, because of Emirates' popularity, everyone flies through Dubai rather than think. But one almost thinks that was a lost opportunity where India could have been this bridge destination between the East, and especially if you're traveling from Europe to the Far East, right? And now with the privatization of Air India, or the impending privatization of Air India, the biggest sort of aviation routes, the direct routes from India to the has opened up, right? So when you talk about aviation, when you talk about aviation that leads to certain infrastructure in India, how do you view those sectors?
Yeah. So let me talk about the infra in general, other than I'll come to aviation, right? So what's happening on infra is that there was this plan of spending 100 lakh crores, which was called the National Infrastructure Pipeline. The numbers have changed a little bit, and of course, the period was 2019 to 2025, but I think that will be adjusted now, given that again we did not get much work in the last, let's say, 1.5 years. But the fact is that the capex increasing is a requirement that the government understands very well. It was articulated very clearly in the national infrastructure pipeline and that pipeline was not just central capex, it was also central ministries, it was central private sector enterprises, state governments, and private sector capex.
Right.
It was also understood that the government will have to do a lot of heavy lifting on the financing of the infra projects, because in India, typically what happens is, I mean, any infra project, I mean, you will only get returns over a period of time, 15, 20, 25 years, right? You have to put money today, but you get your money back over a long period of time. So you also have to finance it in a
And
way
also
that,
it breaks, like it can't be at once. It has to be like a transient
yes,
sort of feature.
of course. And there'll be some uncertainties, right? Some risks associated with the project and so on. So the financing aspect of it, again, there has been a setup of a what we call the dedicated financial institution, which will with Mr. KV Kamath is now heading. They expect to start lending perhaps in Q1 of next year. Again, he has done, like, if you remember, ICICI was set up as a development finance institution, right? I mean, that was not necessarily only infra, but fairly similar concept. So this is like a second time that he's doing this in terms of driving the financing for infrastructure. That needs patient capital. You need to attract pools of capital where people expect fairly low returns, but principal preservation, and they will be okay to lend you for 15, 20, 30 years, right? And typically pension funds or sovereign wealth funds or even investment vehicles, otherwise family offices, many of them globally can participate in those activities, but it has to be structured according to their needs. So one is, of course, defining the ambition. The second part is financing that ambition. The third part is, which, and I'll link this to aviation, is the execution capability.
Yeah.
Even if you say that I will spend, let's say, 100 lakh crores over 5 years, which is like 20 lakh crores every year.
Yeah.
Even if you find 20 lakh crores to be financed, which is of course also a bit of a task, but let's say if you do that between central capex, which is 5-6 lakh crores, CPSEs, state
Or even
state
PhD
government.
participation sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, who will do the projects, right? I mean, let's say you launch those many projects, but do you have enough technology expertise? Do you have those companies in India which can actually run with a pipeline of 20 lakh crores a year, infrastructure projects worth a year? I think still a bottleneck, right? And in that capacity creation is also part of the process. It will have to be ramped up as the NIP ramps up. And the most patent example of this is the aviation sector. Now, of course, it's very clear that India lost out to Dubai, UAE in general, to the extent that Emirates almost became the national carrier of India. Right? Instead of Air India, you can argue that today Emirates is effectively the national carrier given the number of slots they operate. And of course, there's a history of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't want to say that, but unfortunately, that's the truth.
Yeah. So now, so one thing was one reason why Dubai gained was that they had an airport which could ferry that capacity, right? Where hundreds of flights are landing from India and you are kind of shuttling them across the world. Now, in India, that's been a huge challenge because airports have not been planned ahead of time. Mumbai, when I wrote my book on the Maharashtra politics, I had written about this, that the first study of the Navi Mumbai airport was done in 1997. Now Navi Mumbai airport is just now coming up, in the sense that it's started to pick up now. So it probably will go live in 2024, 25, I don't know, around that time. So what was needed in 97 and what was understood that it is needed then is being built after the country has gone through a humongous cycle of development and growth, right?
Yeah.
So we are catching up 30 years. Now, problem is infrastructure works if you make it for the future. When people argue that, why do you need a bullet train? We are just a $2,000 per capita economy. The point is that you start constructing it at 2,000 per capita. By the time it is completed, that you hopefully will be 3,000, 4,000, right? I mean, when you start using it.
No, so I coming from the infrastructure background, I'll always argue this, that we have a thing called projected traffic, projected growth, and so forth. And in US, it is like if you are designing today, you have to design it for 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, depending on the project needs. But that ensures that the project is completed by 7-8 years, which even here we don't see it happening in all projects. The problem in India is a lot of these projects are designed for capacities today or in 2 years or 3 years, and they are not completed for 15 years. So so Mumbai airport actually is an engineering marvel, because actually if you notice, because I had to actually study that for my construction management class, where Mumbai airport, the airport slots, normally planes are kept at 90 degrees, but they are kept at angles, and Ashish writes about this in his books as well, or how it is an infrastructure achievement. But the thing is, and I think Mumbai airport is the busiest airport in the world operating on one runway, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken.
At peak, it was handling 1,000 flights, so that
Yeah.
kind of became big.
It is insane that Mumbai doesn't have two runways. I mean,
A lot of people share that news as an achievement, and it was actually a huge risk that
yes, that's what I'm saying. So in India, jugaad due to risk is equal to an achievement. Unfortunately, that is it's like the whole IPL shifting overseas with 3 weeks to go, right? Like Harsha Bogle says, in no one does as less of the work leading up to a tournament like Indians do, and no one does as much of the work that's needed in the last 3 weeks as Indians do. So infrastructure is the same thing. But what scares me is, given the amount of metro cities that we have, I mean, if you look at the top 10 cities of India, Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata, Ahmedabad, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Pune, and
Right.
I'm forgetting the 10th, but I mean, you could have Lucknow probably right now is upcoming.
Surat maybe.
Surat will be as well. Surat will be, or even Jaipur, if you just look at tourism as an industry. But my thing was, how many of them have world class airports, right? And unfortunately, not many of them do. Like probably six or seven have world class airports that you can compare to the airports of Europe. Most of them require two airports, like not just
Yeah.
one, with the amount of potential traffic that's about to be generated.
So this is a great point. See, another issue. So look at London. I mean, I take that example because I've been there several times. London has got Heathrow, it has got Gatwick, it has got Luton, Stansted, Southend, I think is another one, and London City, right? So 6 airports. Now, of course, London drives practically all of UK economy as the largest city, and I think it's got about 1/6 of the population as well. But a city like London has got 6 airports, and there are hence options to connect at different price points, different types of airlines can operate, different business models can operate. In India, a city like Surat got flights only now in the last 3-4 years, right? It was what ninth largest city in the country. There was hardly any aviation activity.
Yeah.
Pune struggling for a proper airport. The only airport which we have is actually is a Air Force airport. So
It's actually
we,
called the Lohegaon Air Base Airport, I think.
yeah, exactly. I mean, in the sense it's operated actually by the Indian Air Force. So there are limitations to what can happen, both in the current terminal, and there's also been an expansion problem. See, people don't understand that airports have to be expanded early on, right? Much before it is needed, because you need humongous space for doing that. And the reason Noida was able to get, I mean, Jewar is also, I think, I think 50-60 kilometers out of Noida, but that's the thing. If you don't plan it today, you will only get airports which are 50-60 kilometers out of the city. Like Bangalore saw through that. At least Bangalore could do that. Hyderabad, Bangalore, at least they were lucky to have that space outside the city, but not each city has that option, right? So this is a problem which a lot of even the commentators don't understand, saying, why do we need bullet train? Why do we need airport? Why do we need a second airport? Point is, I mean, Mumbai is a city as big as London, as important as London in terms of the Indian context. You should have got a second airport 20 years ago. Delhi, it's getting now, and Delhi also has got a pretty big airport already. So it's good that they will have at least 10 runways, maybe perhaps when both the airports are fully operational in that vicinity. But I think that's the kind of planning which we missed typically. And I really hope that some of the smaller cities, the tier 2 cities,
Like
starting.
for Ahmedabad, which is I think the fifth biggest city or the sixth biggest city in India, there is only one flight that connects Ahmedabad and Europe, and you know that so much of the diamond trade happens with Belgium, which is dominated by Gujaratis. So they
Yeah.
had to actually fly to Mumbai and then go to Antwerp or something. I don't understand why you couldn't have a direct flight from Mumbai also and Ahmedabad also, because there is enough volume. And I mean, I'm just giving one example, right? Like there should be probably direct flights from Gujarat to US, given the amount of expat population that Gujaratis that exists, and it needn't be Air India. It could be an American airline or something like that. So it's just unbelievable. Like every US city, in my opinion, Houston, Dallas, Chicago, New York, should have one or two direct flights to India. Only 4 or 5 of them do right now, and which is a tale of missed opportunities. Because if you look at it, and you said lightly, the amount of time it takes to fly from US to India is the same it takes to fly from US to Dubai. But people
Yeah.
opt for Emirates, and it's just ridiculous if you think about it. But here, hopefully, we like my joke always goes. In somehow, India Inc. Puts a lot of burden on Ratan Tata's shoulders, and aviation is no different right now. Everyone seems to be. But moving from aviation, sorry, finish up your point, and then I'll move
See,
to.
the good news there is that the Air India privatization, I think, I mean, we've been following both politics and policy are there for several years. Air India has been top of the. I mean, if you see when this government took over in 2014, if you read the op-eds, etc., most economic type commentators would have said that for them, privatization of Air India is a number one priority, right? Because that would be a signaling mechanism of how the government is operating. It's actually a little ironic and a little sad that the government did not get enough credit for getting it done finally. I mean, it took a bit of a time. There were, of course, several issues to resolve. It had to structure the whole deal in a way that the cash versus debt burden had to be kind of
And
adjusted.
at the risk of sounding very terrible, I'm saying that it also operated like the whole employees union operated like an outpost of like some trade union congress. So you have to
Yeah, I
also
mean,
deal with that.
of course, I mean, there were all kinds of oppositions, right? And the fact that the government could actually get it done in this scenario, I think it's a phenomenal achievement. And privatization is certainly one of the themes which seems to be running right now, because another company called Central Electronics got privatized after that. Several others financial bids have been received in the last few weeks. So let's hope that part continues.
Absolutely, absolutely. But moving from aviation to another public policy sector that doesn't get enough discussion is shipping, right? And India has improved a lot on that. So the reason I bring it in the World Trade Organization context is that India had sort of emerged as this sort of a midpoint of the world when it came to also hosting all these things, right? In terms of Asia, with its connect in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, do you see that changing? Do you see that positively impacting India's chances?
So I think there again, it's a partly the same story, which is that you need ports with, I mean, deep water ports with capacity, which can be
Right.
used, physical capacity and connectivity, which can be used as transshipment ports. There are, like for example, Colombo or even Singapore. A lot of these ports
No,
are
not
built.
Hamilton Tota.
Yeah. I mean, of course, let's not go there,
Let's
but
not get into that.
but yeah, there are transshipment ports already in the vicinity, right? And what these ports do is they get larger ships, and then
Yeah.
it's like a multiplexing, demultiplexing concept, right, in engineering, where you basically uh, aggregate and then disaggregate in those locations. So I think I mean, it will take some work, because at least in aviation, the thing is India itself has got enough capacity. So, for example, if you really had an airport like Dubai, India itself had capacity to generate passenger traffic. For shipping, India is, of course, now the trade participation is increasing, but we are certainly not top few countries on the trade in the trade metrics, right? So I think it will take much more effort via the aviation to make a successful transshipment port. I think that location wise also very few options may be available right now, and capacity wise also. So I'm not sure if that would be like the one of the key themes. What is more important for us is to make our own ports much more professional, capable of handling specific type of cargo. It helps to have ports which specialize in certain types of commodities, because then the understanding is much better of how do you handle that, what are the turnaround times needed, what are the processes and procedures required. So I think some of that internal focus itself may actually help us tremendously, rather than
Absolutely.
trying to create several transshipment ports, even though we have a long coastline.
Mm, mm. So for and then that's the thing. I pardon all the digressions we're taking, but as you know, the format of the podcast is digression. So we started with the economy, and we've gone to ships and ports and roads and whatnot. But ultimately, that's the thing, right? To manage with a country like India, the question funding becomes a huge challenge, because especially with the economy being taken as much of a hit that it has in the last 2 years because of COVID, right? How does one move forward? So how do you view, Ashish, like the economic path to recovery for India, right? Like in terms of how do you view that changing? Ultimately, we'll have to get back to normalcy. Actually, as we record, a few hours ago, the Prime Minister announced jabs for younger folks, 15 to 18, and booster shots as well. So once that happens, and I think more boosters are going to come for older people, like older people and folks like you and I as well. And now that is will be used as a vehicle to drive that. Okay, let's get back to normal, right? We cannot just completely operate in silos till time goes runs out. So what do you think, what will drive the economic growth forward for India?
So I think the first recognition, other what needs to happen for that is to understand that you have to live with COVID, right? Every few months, it seems that there will be a wave. At least that's how it appears right now. No one is clear whether it is a 1 year, 2 year, 5 year thing, right? There's no medical kind of certainty on that aspect of the disease.
Hmm.
So, hoping that the infection becomes much milder,
Hmm.
and that it doesn't occupy as much hospital space as it has in the second wave in India. I think that is the first recognition, even psychologically. I see a lot of, especially in the media, there's a lot of fear mongering. If you see how things are, like you described how it is in US, right? People are going out, having, watching football games, and like in US, each stadium could be a what 30, 40, 50,000 people. I
No,
don't
no,
know.
no. There are
Oh,
some stadiums where had more than 100,000 people.
100,000 people, yeah. So
So
I mean, large crowds are gathering, and they are behaving normally, despite the fact that US has been in a much worse situation than India, at least in the last 3 4 months, right, in terms of the numbers
yeah,
and
yeah, and right now
deaths.
US is recording 300,000 cases, and
Yeah,
movies are going houseful. In Christmas, Spider-Man, people are going to watch Spider-Man left, right, and center.
yeah.
So it's, yeah,
So I mean, of course, as long as people take precautions, whatever they can. I mean, all said and done, no one really understands how or when can one get infected, right? I mean, it's a bit of a black box for any individual. So while concern is fine, how do you kind of move from being concerned and then channelize it to take whatever precaution it is possible to take for an
yeah,
individual, and then essentially continue with your life. I think once that recognition comes in, at least I see that in Europe. There's a good a New York Times article also actually yesterday on this, about how Europe has just accepted that it is going to be there. So
yeah.
so you just live with it, and don't panic. But actually, I see that, and having lived here now for 4 months, in the peak of a wave. I mean, this is actually the worst period I mean, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Netherlands, several countries have had peaks after I came here. I find the frenzy in India significantly higher than any other local context, right? In
Yeah.
terms of how people comment on the situation, on the evolving situation. I mean, of course, partly it is also driven by the fact that we had a fairly bad Delta wave, but that is also the case. As I said, even here, it's the case where hospitals are almost full. There are problems. People are going
But let me
untreated.
tell you something, right? And this, I'm going to sound very controversial here, but it's a debate. I'm not saying one side or the other. The whole IPL debate happened that during Delta wave, the IPL was cancelled, and it was moved to Dubai, and sure enough, they made a decision. In US, the NFL or the NBA wasn't cancelled, the MLB wasn't cancelled, nor were there debates. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I'm saying that in US the wave was deadlier than in India. And the question you have to ask yourself is, in future, if we do see a spike when the IPL takes place in April, it is not sustainable for the Indian economy to keep ending tournaments. Either you don't have them, or you have them and you stick through with it, or have them in a more calculated. Don't do this crazy thing कि अब 6 ग्राउंड पे अलग अलग पे जाओ. You create 3 bubbles and keep the teams there. डोंट डू दिस कि मैं हर एक क्रिकेट एसोसिएशन, ये प्रॉब्लम ये है कि बीसीसीआई आल्सो वांट्स कि सबको थोड़ा थोड़ा शगुफा दे दो,
Right.
so that is the debate that India needs to have with itself.
Yeah, I mean, every entity, every economic entity has to decide what is the most optimum way. There's also an issue on the city authorities getting far too aggressive on restrictions, or doing things which would be only have signaling mechanism but unable to enforce those restrictions. Right. So I think there's some lessons to be learned on that also, as to doing only those things which you can actually enable or enforce, rather than essentially announcing a lot of measures but then unable to really see them
Exactly.
through.
And
So
the ultimate solution is vaccination. Sorry, you were complete, you were saying something. Yeah.
no. So I was saying the same thing, that ultimately, I mean, India's vaccination is not too bad. I mean, we are about what 83 crore single dose, which is actually quite phenomenal if you see globally. the number of the percentage of population eligible and those who have actually taken vaccines, it has been stagnating at 65, 70, 75% for most countries. In India, it's already up to about 84 crores, and out of 95, which was the adult population. And now, of course, with 15 to 18, I don't know how many crores will get added, perhaps 6, 7 crores. I need to check that number. But the fact is that the acceptance of vaccines in India has been far higher compared to any other country.
The fully vaccinated numbers, and I'm quoting yesterday's numbers, right? So they'll add ever 83.4 or almost 83.5 crores single dose and 57 crores, 56.99 crores, or 57 ही गिन सकते हैं fully. So that's about 41% fully vaccinated, and that's 41% of the total population.
Yeah.
If you look at the eligible is almost 60, 65 probably.
Yeah, exactly. So I think overall we've done quite well on vaccination, especially after the fairly bad Delta wave. So I think these factors have to come together, and as a society, we need to basically deal with it. That yes, there will be a problem, and stop looking for your mayor or your state government or your the central government for every small problem. Basically, beyond the
और कुछ up to a certain beyond a certain point हो भी क्या सकता है. So a lot of people I saw were whining कि tourism वापस शुरू हो गया. I was like, भाई, there are cities and states in India that just depend on tourism. You cannot just recruit.
Exactly. So the point is that the people who can afford to stay home are always, I mean, they can always comment that someone should not go out and work, or someone should not indulge in X or Y activity. The problem is that not everyone is like you. I mean, each job has got its own profile. There are specific requirements of a job. If you're working in a manufacturing industry, you cannot, work from home, and you have to work on the shop floor. So
and not just that. If for people who cannot afford to live in a bigger home with space, right? कोई अगर 2 bedroom के छोटे flat में रह रहा है मुंबई में, he's making enough money that he can afford a trip somewhere. यार, give him a week. He wants to go out of that, him or her, a week to the. And I mean, मैं अपने खुद का example दूंगा. If I'm fully healthy, fully vaccinated, boosted, I love going to a bar and having a beer. I absolutely love it. So why not? If it's safe to go, go out. Because for mental health also, it's not healthy for you to keep. The reason why you enjoy being home is because you have been out. So now you are enjoying being home. अगर आपकी यही life है for the next 4 years, I mean, that's going to be terrible.
Yeah, I think so. If the psychological part and the acceptance part is sorted out, then of course the macroeconomic factors have been quite favorable last few months, and all the short-term indicators have been quite positive. So things are falling in place, but there can't be too many disruptions. If you have frequent disruptions, and especially in large economies in large states, southern states and western states, which are the engines of manufacturing activity, primarily industrial activity, that would pose another challenge. But I mean, let's hope for the best.
Let's hope for the best. Absolutely. So as we get into the closure of the podcast, or the last part of the podcast, the one last question, or the last couple of questions I had for you, Ashish, was that as you are now, you are now in a position that we have been sort of for the last few years getting a sort of a 10,000 feet or 10,000 miles away view of India, right? And it's a very different situation. You were in the thick of action and stuff like that. So how different has it been? Have you yourself felt that you've looked at aspects of India that you weren't looking at before when you were at the thick of things? I'm not saying one is better than the other or something. It's just two different things.
So there's nothing that can change the experience of doing something from the inside in a system, right? From outside, you can give any number of suggestions or any ideas, etc. But when you're inside the system, you know so much more about what the opportunities are, what the constraints are, what is already happening. One thing which I've realized is that a lot of things happen in the government, right? Just that it's not tweeted out all the time. So when a lot of people say that XYZ is not being focused on, it's just a lack of knowledge. I mean, it's not just XYZ, but it could also like all A to Z is being focused on, but or being undertaken or being thought about different stages of evolution. But of course, not a lot of it is public, right? So in terms of what is the thought process.
Yeah.
So I think governments do have this inherent limitation that you cannot always open all your cards publicly in terms of the various going on. And it shouldn't, of course, but it also adds the and especially in today's world of hot takes and low attention spans, people also forget, or people people make a lot of suggestions, but they don't follow it up sometimes. They don't understand that has been taken, that has happened after 2 3 months. They don't go back and understand that has been ticked
It
off.
adds to the mystique.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I think that aspect has been quite fascinating for me to discover that a lot of things which people demand for, and for good reasons, a lot of them are being thought about. They could be at different stages of implementation. I've also seen that. I mean, I keep giving this example, Adit, but I think most people who write about policy, etc. See, there are typically three types of people in any ecosystem, right? So there's one set of people who will talk about problems, who are very good at identifying what the problem is, right? So they can really articulate this very well. They can tell you why something is not working. Then there's one set of people who write about solutions. So they are focused on, okay, fine, they are not, they acknowledge there's a problem, but their focus is to essentially resolve that, or at least understand what the resolution could be. And there is a third type of people, which is essentially implementers, right? So implementers are given a blueprint, and they will take it forward from there and say, okay, fine, I'm neither invested in the problem nor invested in the solution, but I
I'll tell you
get this.
practically क्या हो सकता है.
Exactly. What can you practically done, right? How do you go from point A to point B? Not being invested intellectually in either A or B. I mean, essentially, I'm just saying that, okay, I have to get this done.
Yeah.
So I think as even when I'm writing, or when I was writing about some of these things, typically a lot of focus on the problems. It's because it comes to you naturally. You can observe around you and you can say, oh yeah, this is not working, this is wrong, why can't this happen, why can't that happen? But the system has to necessarily, I mean, of course, I'm not saying I think all three roles are very critical, because you need people of all types, even inside the system, not just outside. But inside the system, you do have those three roles typically. I mean, you will find people who by their nature or by their expertise do one or the other.
Yeah.
When you write outside, I think a far more, let's say, there's a far more lopsided view there. People write more about problems and less about solutions, and almost nothing about implementation, because they're not really exposed to that process. You can also argue that it's not their job to do that, which is also fine. But I think this distinction was very important when I see from inside, because you realize that I think in the system you have to acknowledge that, yes, I mean, there's no point fretting about a problem. You know that it exists, right? You need to start finding ways to deal with it, and how do you chip at the margins? Do you do something more radically to solve it completely? Can you do that? Can it be implemented at all? You may have a wonderful idea, which everyone understands is a wonderful idea, but it is not being done for a reason. It's not that there's a lack of intellectual, there's no intellectual deficit there. It's just that it can't be done for XYZ reasons. Those things are very important to understand.
On a lighter note, outside the system, everyone is a variation of P. Sainath, depending on which ideology you belong to. I'm just joking, of course. That's not the truth. This is a very Manu Joseph line to write, actually. But, no, but that's true, actually, right? Let's give an example of the airport, right? Someone from outside the system will say कि airport जरूरी है, जो हम लोग बोल रहे हैं. Someone from inside the system is like, हाँ, यहाँ जरूरी है, यहाँ पे बना दो. The third person who has to implement is like, हाँ, पर मैं land कहाँ से लाऊं? Is like, if I start acquiring the land and someone says कि, oh, you cannot do this, you cannot do that, you cannot do this. There are so many aspects, right? And Ashish can probably write a book just on how to acquire land in India alone. So maybe that's the second book. Like, maybe this is a very fascinating. So he's actually written a fascinating book from the inside of Maharashtra called The Fadnavis Years on the Maharashtra function. Do read that book. Do write to him what you think about that book. That's going to be my first plug. And then maybe force Ashish to write a second book about what it means, maybe identifying the solutions and the problems both that plague India.
So, that's very much on my mind. And I do realize that, I will take a lot of perspective from my stint. So, of course, writing a book is a difficult task, as I realized in the first attempt. So I have to.
If I was a thinker, I would. Breaking news, full screen karo isko. Breaking news, he's writing book and he's announcing it live on the podcast. But here, unfortunately, we are far too subtle for our own liking. But before we end the show, Ashish, any recommendations for our audience? This has been a fantastic discussion.
Yeah. So, I mean, I will give two recommendations, because we've been talking about, one book that I've been reading, and one I completed like some time back. So there is one book which I finished last week was by an American columnist, Walter Russell Mead. He's a regular columnist in WSJ, so I'm pretty sure that you track him. But I think his book on the American foreign policy, it's titled "Special Providence: How American Policy Changed the World." Is quite fascinating. It gives a lot of perspective on how the world today is the way it is, and the reason how West has influenced different cultures, different governments, different societies. Of course, it's a very American lens. You may not agree with a lot of the slant which he has taken, and it's a fairly broad brush book. It's not a book which talks about nitty gritties. It's a fairly, so there could be a lot of holes also in it.
It's
Which,
a
by the way,
columnist book and not an analyst's book.
yeah, exactly. But I think it's a good narrative book. It tells you about how US has influenced the world and how why we are where we are in several countries. So that is one. The other one which I also finished recently was a book by Akhilesh Tilotia. It's called Through the Looking Glass. So for those who are interested in the government, Akhilesh is actually like me. He did a stint in the government. He was working with Mr. Jayant Sinha when he was the Minister of State for Civil Aviation. He was the Officer on Special Duty, or OSD, to Mr. Sinha. He's a banker. He worked in he's been in the investment banking industry, and he now works with the NIIF, National Infrastructure Investment Fund. So, but very fascinating book. For he has documented his experience about how an external person who's very enthusiastic about changing things, about making a difference, what happens when the person goes in the government and then sees the realities of how implementation part becomes much more critical, right? So it's called Through the Looking Glass. It released just this year. In fact, Akhilesh completed his stint. I think it was last year, I believe. So he or well, actually I don't remember that part very clearly, but the book came out this year. But so it's been a fairly fascinating read, very insightful for me at least, and someone who's if you want to know more about how government functions from inside, Akhilesh has already done that before I could. So I would recommend reading that.
Fascinating. My recommendations are going to be on completely to he's given two great books, and as I recommended, read Ashish's book as well. It's going to be a show that I just watched called Decoupled, written by Manu Joseph. It's like all Manu's work, very polarizing. One side will part of you is going to love the show, part of you is going to hate the show, but watch it. He takes a lot of bold positions, and the reviewers have hated it because he takes a lot of pot shots at them. It's a fascinating show. And then there is another recommendation I have on pop culture is there is a movie I watched called Atrangi Day, and the movie, whatever you do think about it, listen to it for Rahman's music, because the old Rahman is back. It's the touch of folk. And then there's a third book that I just came across. I just finished reading it. I think Chayank had recommended this 16 Stormy Days by Tripurdaman Singh, about what happened during the 1947 part. And I think Tripurdaman has come up with a new book as well. I forget the name of that book, but I'm going through that 16 Stormy Days, and it's a terrific book, and I'm looking forward to reading a second book, because a lot of stuff what is known during 1947 is like it's not discussed much. Like for us, we always focus like on things that happened pre 1947 and post 1950. But between 1947, and I don't mean August, between January 1947 to December 90 or to January 1950 is a fascinating 3 years of what we should be discussing. India saw a lot, and maybe write to us what you think about it. But thank you for joining us, Ashish. This was great. You've been very generous with your time, and we look forward to doing this. Maybe not once a year, maybe sooner than that.
Yeah, absolutely, Adit. We're happy to come back, and great conversation as always.
Absolutely. Guys, like, share, subscribe. You know the drill. Comment. Please follow Ashish on Twitter, and please write to us in our comments what you thought about it. Till then, it's goodbye, and we'll see you next week, maybe in the other side of the new year. Till then, take care, everyone.